All right, looks like the witching hour is upon us. Shall we start?
I am ready.
All righty, so welcome to the October virtual show table featuring the great Courtney Hackney. We welcome our new members, Donnie and Clifford. We thank everybody for sending in their pictures of great orchids, and we thank Janice for putting together a great show for us.
Well,
So,
I say every time that I'm so impressed with everyone involved with this, especially Janice, because she has to sort of figure out what goes together. She does a great job. I can find very few things I would change in terms of just, ease of discussion. Well, let's start out with this Habenaria Pegasus. It's interesting that we're just seeing so many Habenarias where 10 years ago you were lucky to ever see one. I mean, they weren't available. And what's most interesting is how they're being used in hybridizing, which we'll see on the next slide. But this one, you can see the effect of Medusa in this hybrid. Beautiful, beautifully grown. So
well, I love them.
I know you aren't the only one.
Yeah.
Next, Pectibinaria. Here we have what I think of sort of an innovative thing. Habenaria hybrids are one thing, but then to start mixing them with other genera. Here we have two genera, and in fact, one of the parents or both of the parents are hybrids themselves. So we're in the second generation of hybridizing. And I guess the most important takeaway from this is that Habenarias reproduce pretty quickly and get to flowering fairly quickly. So they're able to generate um, new hybrids fast and go to the following generation. But again, beautiful thing. You can see some impacts of Medusae, and I don't know some of these species well enough to know what the other attributes are, but I'm recognizing the Medusae in this.
It's amazing that it didn't pick any of the Regnerii in there. It looks like it's a straight Medusa, doesn't it?
It sure looks a lot like it, but I think if you knew the species in the background well enough, you'd be able to pick out some attributes that are coming from the
Mhm.
the other species. Okay, next, Cygnocus super Cooper. Every time I see this, I just think about how spectacular this is. Cycnoches they're an interesting group, and clearly belong in the group with the catasetums. They're just different enough that you can recognize that. Typically a longer pseudobulb, and I guess the inflorescence comes out of the dorsal most of the time on the Cygnocces, although I haven't seen enough of them to know. But this has got all the things that you would want an orchid flower to have. It's got size, it's a beautiful green color, just a perfect hybrid. And that's Sheila's, and she clearly knows what she's doing. And then on the right, we have Fred Clarkara, Midnight Lace. Fred's coming. He'll be our speaker next month. So if you want to meet the real Fred, that's the Fred Clarkara genus is named after, come to the meeting. But look at the color on this. When these first showed up, it was astounding to see this dark a color, and they're referred to as the black orchid. And you can see, looking at the plant and how it's being grown, and you can see the inflorescence coming out, and the attributes. Catasetum fimbriatum was one of my all-time favorite catasetums when I used to grow them. Just the lip just is an astounding thing. This is an interesting group of orchids, the catasetums and that cataseminae. And it's a it's a hybrid that most people probably should try, but if you do, you just have to be very aware of the treatment and the care you have to give them in winter, which is no care. Next, Dendrobium antenatum. That's not Dendrobium antenatum. Not sure what it is, but antenatum is a really distinct species and named for the characteristic that looks like an antelope. This one's just missing it. I'm guessing it's a hybrid of some sort, but clearly being grown well. Dendrobium topazicum, and this has got another name, a synonym, and that isn't uncommon for an awful lot of species, especially the ones that are being described now. Sometimes we're finding that they were described previously, and having to deal with two different names. But this is one of the dendrobiums that you can see blooming on the old canes. And it's fascinating to watch the buds come out of these canes because it looks so different in terms of those of us that grow Phalaenopsis and Callias. It just seems strange. It's sort of like the blooms on a chocolate tree. They just don't seem right. But look at the color on this thing. Really, really nice. It looks like this is being grown outside, I'm guessing. I don't know where Pam Peters lives, but I'm guessing they get a little bit of cool weather anyway.
I think Pam's San Diego.
Well, they get enough cool weather down there, especially if they're close to the coast. But being grown well. Next. Oh, I love this thing, this particular group. But darn it, they're not easy to grow for me. This is Mariposa, Papilio by Kalini, and that is a hybrid with Papilio. I'm not sure what they were trying to get in the original cross. I think they were trying to get a little more manageable plant, but it does look an awful lot like the other species, which is an interesting facet in itself. This is Ellen's. She's got three inflorescences, and again, for those who are novice to this group, uh, never cut the spike off. It just keeps blooming forever and ever and ever, for years and years. And if you grow it well, you can have every year you'll get a new growth or two, each of which will put up one or two inflorescences, and pretty soon you can have quite a few. And that looks like what Ellen's been doing here. Um, got a nice plant, looks very healthy. On the right is a beautiful thing. I spent some time looking this one up. Trichocentrum is a fascinating group. They're in the Oncidium Alliance, and when we used to talk about intergeneric Oncidianae, this was sort of one that was hiding in the background. And if you look at this flower, you can see how nice and round this flower is. Very different than a lot of the Oncidiums. And uh, it hid itself very well and took on colors from many of the other genera that were mixed in. What I like about this one is that it's a pure trichocentrum. So there is a lot of attributes within this genus alone to warrant making hybrids with different species. A lot of flowers, looks like some branching. I think this is a group that many of us here would probably do fairly well growing. Next, Gracia rex, variety cicada. Primary hybrid that's been around a long time. This was registered first in 1964. And if you get interested in looking up names, you got to be careful with this one because Rex is a name that's been applied to three other hybrids in the Oncidianae. And the reason that happened was because they had they were different genera at the time. And now that so many of the intergeneric, or what we used to call intergeneric Oncidianae, have been turned into Oncidiums or another genus, um, those hybrids all reverted back to the Brassia name, but they kept the Rex too. This is a very nice one. As I said, it's been around since 1964, and there are quite a few different clones, and I hesitate to even guess how many times this cross has been remade. And you can see why it would be remade over and over again. That's the beautiful characteristic of the genus. Nice inflorescence that get away from the leaves just enough so you can see the flowers. Good arrangement on the stems. All of what you're looking for in a hybrid. Next, Miltonia morelliana. And this is a Miltonia, not a Miltoniopsis. What's pretty interesting about this particular species is how dominant it is in hybrids. I've got a hybrid with this and another species of Miltonia. And during the storm that crushed my greenhouse, the basket that they were both in got turned upside down. And I waited to bloom them both so I could identify which was the true Miltonia and which was the hybrid. And I still to this day can't tell them apart. It is that dominant in the first generation. And if you look at Miltonia Honolulu, Warren's best, you can see what I'm talking about. Most of the characteristics of this you're seeing are coming from the Moreliana. It's a fascinating group. I think my plant has the same flowers have been open for at least a month, and typically there'll be multiple growths, and each of them producing one or two spikes, and it'll be in bloom in my greenhouse for 2 or 3 months, and it's a beautiful, beautiful color, very nice. And Sheila's doing a great job on Honolulu, and so is Ellen. It's a nice one to have. Everyone should have this if you just want to have something different just for the heck of it. This is a good one to have. Next, Path Memoria Alegria Gutierrez. Look at how clean and pure that is. The alba forms of the Paphiopedilums. When they came along, they were quite a sensation. Pretty straightforward to develop once you have the albinistic forms of the species. And this one, you can see the Superbians in there, and you can even see some of the characteristics of that variety, their Curticii. But gorgeous. One flower on each stem, and the leaves are typically really nice on this kind of a hybrid. This has got an award, Napa Valley HCC AOS. Frag Teresa Faust. I love the name. Um, Not that I'm a fan, but anyway, Sorcerer's Apprentice by Sunset Glow. And when you really take a good look at the background of this, you see that there's a lot of Bessie on both sides. And if you're not familiar with the history of the frags, before Bessie came along, I won't say frags were boring, but they all looked a lot alike. There weren't any really colorful ones. And Bessie just added that beautiful orange red to the palette that is the frags. I mean, there are other species that have come along that also have color, but once the Bessie came, an awful lot of growers who had no interest in frags got interested, and you're seeing some of the results. Beautiful color, and you can see how they're sequentially blooming in this particular photo. That's very nicely bloomed. If you try to grow frags here in Florida, be aware, most of them do not like the temperatures that we have. They can be grown. People grow them inside, under lights. And I have one growing in my greenhouse. Every year it struggles during the summer. And all I do is when summer really starts getting warm, I put it in a place where it's most shaded and has the most air moving by it just to help cool it. It doesn't grow great, but the rest of the year, once it cools down, it picks up and away it goes. And I've had this for probably 25 years. So it can be done, even here in steamy Florida. Next, this is one of the cutest little species around. I truly didn't appreciate how nice this was. Someone gave me a piece of this, 25 years ago at least. Um, and I put it in a little shallow clay pot, and you can sort of see in a gravel. This is a terrestrial, and it's from Mexico. It's supposed to not like really hot weather, but it always did really well in my greenhouse in North Carolina, which wasn't much different in terms of temperature in the summer than here. What's most fascinating about it, and you can see it this in this photo, this is Keith Davis's plant. You can see there are a lot of individual, what look like individual plants, individual stems, and it grows by producing stolons. So instead of the new growths coming alongside the old one, it has these little stolons. They're really thin, wiry, underground stems that grow, and a new plant will pop up. A new growth is the best way to say that. The flowers are small and white, and it's pretty hard to grow unless you have good water. I discovered that when I moved to Florida. I had this plant for years, as I mentioned. Somewhere along the line, a piece of it must have fallen out of the pot because when I went to move and started cleaning out my old tables, lo and behold, the biggest plant I had was underneath the bench growing in the gravel.
Oh my.
Um, but it did not like the water in Florida. It does not like hard water at all. It's not the heat, it's the water more than anything. And you can see Keith has really good water, and you can see what it looks like when it grows. These have become almost extinct in the wild. I'm not sure if there's still any around. But fortunately, there are quite a few folks who have these growing in their greenhouses, and you can see some of them really know how to grow them based on this photo. Beautifully done, Keith. Next, Phal Samara. That's a combination, primary hybrid of Balina and Violacea. And you'll often see this color form. And this color form is interesting because typically it's made by crossing two albinistic plants, not necessarily true albas. Often one will be a cerulean, and you'll get this sort of uh, pale colored petals and sepals with this little pink lip. Beautiful. And remember, if you want to grow this particular type of Phalaenopsis, they really primarily bloom when it's warm. They don't like really cold weather, and you have to be real careful of getting water in the crown. The leaves like to hang down, and they're nice and glossy and shiny when you get it right, but they also pretty much like good water. On the right, Dortonopsis, which we now call Phal. This is Geoho Summer Love. It's beautiful. I love the color on that. And I should have known that was Sue's when I looked at it. What I found interesting is I was looking at the flower count on this and thinking maybe there's equestris in the background, but when I looked it up, it's actually Pulcherima that makes the small flowers and the inflorescence, and a good mix of other species in there to make the arrangement just right and have this unusual color variation. The hybridizers have done wonders with this, the miniatures and the Phalaenopsis, adding lots and lots of color to them. Next, Cerulean or blue vandas. We've got an array of them here. And I love the fact that we have first one, the most classic, Vanda Rothschildiana. And if you're not familiar with Rothschildiana, it came around a long time ago. It combines the blue color of the cerulean color from cerulean with the giant flowers of Sandarana and that beautiful pattern. And if you're wondering how much it's been used, you'll see it in all the other plants here or photos in this. And there are 263 hybrids with it. And if you look at the second, third generation and on, there's almost 6,000 progeny that have originated from the Rothschildiana. It's it's an amazing hybrid, and you can see it in the Vanda Pacara Delight. You see two clones here. At least I think they're two clones. They look a little different, but that can just be the photo. And the upper left is that's mine. And the thing I love about it is it's a species crossed onto a hybrid that has the Rothschildiana in the background. And the tricolor is one of those species in the background that can add spots to the flower. And you can see it's an extremely vigorous grower, two inflorescences here. And the reason I have never brought this to a meeting is because somebody challenged me to grow a Vanda in a pot, and I did. The problem is growing a Vanda in a pot. Now I have to bring the whole bench to get it to a show or anything. It's just gotten too large, and I'm not going to touch it if I don't have to. It just produces probably 5 or 6 inflorescences during the summer, and it's in bloom. Oh, I'm guessing from May through right about now. It's still in bloom. Just puts out inflorescence after inflorescence. And that's one of the characteristics that often comes when you combine a complex hybrid like Fuchs Delight with a species, which is tricolor. And that's a Fuchs hybrid. The first and last name, if you don't know, or the Hackney's first 10, one of the characteristics in judging each characteristic of a hybrid has a certain number of points it can get. And somewhere along the line, we were discussing it, and I didn't think it could get awarded because the shape's not good. But someone who shall remain anonymous said, yeah, but color is the first 10 points. And they were right. It got an award. So what do I know? Next, Ascasenda, now Vanda Claire Garrett variety Sunburst. When I first saw what was in this cross, I thought that's not right. It's Lamellata brought by Sem Suxamran Gold, which I know pretty well. But there is a Lamellata that's got a form, and it produces these flares on the petals. This was not that. This was not used to make this hybrid. This is the standard, the straight limulata. And you can see the characteristic of the species being in the background, more open flower, but the color is there, coming from the Suk Samarin Gold. On the right, Ascocentrum miniatum, one of the species that everyone should have if you've got any vandas at all. One of the easiest to grow. It quickly forms a big clump, growing out these little basil sprouts. Um, and you can see is one, two, three. I don't know how many plants are in there, how many basil sprouts, but it looks like three or four. And they just get bigger and bigger. And as it grows, you can pretty much have it flower where you can hardly even see the vegetation. The leaves just get covered up by all the flowers. You would think this would be in the background of an awful lot of vandas. This is now considered a vanda, but it's not. There are other ascocentrums that were more amenable to the hybridizing process, but this still is around in a couple of hybrids. Next, here we have some good names. Wayanara Tango Fire. How many people know what a Wayanara is? I'll bet not many of you. A Wayanara is a Renanthera, Arides, Rhynchostylus, and Vanda all combined into a complex hybrid. So multiple generations. And you can see that this is a primary, I mean, this is a species storii crossed with a complex hybrid. And if you look carefully and you know the Vandaceous group, you can pick out some of the characteristics of these different genera in this particular hybrid. On the bottom left is K. Soren's orchid tactic. This is the Vanda vietnamica, and that is a species from Vietnam that used to be in a different genus. Um, it looks really different than most Vandas, but is a Vanda, and you can see that that lip is a characteristic that pops out in this particular hybrid. And Arides hulidiana, I love the Arides. They're fairly easy to grow. They grow very fast. They like highlight. What I love most about them is not just the flowers, but the fragrance is unbelievable. It's worth having one just to have the fragrance. And then Trichoglottis atropurpurea. I think I got that one right. That's a trichoglottis. Yeah. Purpurea. Um, Look at how it grows. You can see the flowers coming out in the leaf axils, and there'll be quite a few of them on a stem. The stems grow very fast, and they'll have this spectacularly colored flowers. I'm surprised we don't see more of this particular species. Like I said, it grows very easy and it's readily available. I've not had much luck growing it, and I think it just doesn't like my water. But many of the people in our club grow it very well. This is Carol's, and you can see exactly what the plant should look like and what the flower looks like. And look at that lip. That lip is such a characteristic thing. Supposedly, it will breed with just about any Vanda. I tried breeding it with Phalaenopsis and it won't go, but other people have been more successful at combining this with other species and hybrids. Next, where have the bulbophyllums been? We just haven't seen many in the last couple of months. This is Kalimpong Mama Jane's Joy. And here you can see two species combined. And again, if you look at both of the species and you look at this hybrid, you can make out the characteristics of both species, but one is dominant. But can't quite see it because this is a still. But if you blow on that lip, it'll wobble. Bulbophyllums all have cantilevered lips, and that's all designed for the insect pollinator who lands on it because of the fragrance. And when it does, the lip delivers them to the inside of the flower closer to where the pollen is and where the pollen needs to be deposited. Look at the spots on this. If there is a group of orchids that deserve to be photographed up close, no matter how big the flower, it's probably this group. Many of them are hairy with warts all over the place. And there's so many different species, more being described every day. This particular group seems to speciate readily. It's also the only genus that has a worldwide distribution in the tropics. Most of the other ones are confined to North and South America or the eastern part of the Atlantic or the west part of the Atlantic. or the Indo-Pacific, but this group is worldwide in its distribution. Not the species, but the group itself. Okay, next. Labiata variety semi-alba nuri. This is my plant. Bill Rogerson gave me this. It was recently awarded. It is a stunning thing, and it's one of the characteristics to me of semi-alba cattleyas. This contrast in the pure white that seems to glow, and then the lip color. And I suspect that this got awarded an AM not just because of the contrast, but also the intense color in that lip. That is about as thick a color as you could get. And the flower is really nice. If you don't know the species, Labiata tends not to be a big round flower, although it has some characteristics that add to roundness in hybrids. And the semi-albas are often hard to find and to grow well. But if you look carefully on that flower on the bottom left, you can see a little color on the petal. And I'm kind of surprised that wasn't noticed in the award description because that would have taken some points off. It's not truly a pure semi-alba, but I love it. Next, Cattleya frontis, variety Majesty. That's a tetraploid. And what's interesting about it is we know Horace is a tetraploid, but I'm guessing somehow they know that the Triene was a tetraploid, or this is just one of the unusual ones that pops out. But I mentioned round flowers just a minute ago. Look how round that flower is. The judging standard for Cattleyas, for standard Cattleyas, has always been if you have if you draw a circle around the flower, the tips of the petals and sepals, the ideal is to have a perfectly round flower inside that circle. And this is about as close as it comes. And Horace has a big influence of Cattleya triene. I once asked a famous hybridizer why they didn't use Horace more in his hybridizing program, and he told me, he said, we have trienes that are just as good. And to some extent, that isn't far off because some trienes are beautiful and round. And if you look at the awards of trienes, you'll see some that look very much just like this flower. Pink Empress Juicen on the right. This is Mount Hood, a relatively old hybrid from of a nursery in the Pacific Northwest by Bryce Canyon, another West Coast product. Um, this is a spectacular flower in so many ways. Can't quite see the size of Juicen. Uh, I think I've had them bloom over 8 inches in natural spread. They tend to be a little lighter in the lavender color range. That lip often sets them apart. And the only downside to this hybrid, as far as I've ever been able to tell, is the fact that often, unless you have a really powerful grown plant, it's got a lot of energy, the flowers tend to be a little close together. But this one's got an AM, so at least one time it must have bloomed where it just had everything the judges want. It's a great parent. It makes pretty hybrids and adds to the size if you use it in hybridizing. Next,
Whoop, there we go.
Cattleya ludimaniana. That's typically something we see blooming more in the spring. But like all good plants, sometimes they decide to bloom when they damn well please. And the interesting thing about ludimaniana, it's often confused with Cattleya mossy, and shouldn't be. They really have some distinct characteristics, but they live close together. And apparently, there's been quite a bit of just natural hybridizing between the two. And what one looks for, if you don't have the flower to smell and a certified member of the species, the smell will give it away, but you don't typically have another one in bloom. But Ludimaniana tends to have very flat flowers relative to Cattleya mossy. Mossy's flowers tend to have the petals a little more forward hanging down. And that'll pop out in hybrids, and it'll pop out in the species. You'll see it. Cattleya ludimania tends to be more colored. So the darkest flowers you will see in hybrids between the two generally are dark because of the ludimaniana. And that's another way in which um, growers have declared whether it's a hybrid or a species. If it's very dark and it's labeled Cattleya mossy, it probably isn't a full-blown Cattleya mossy. It's probably a hybrid. And that could go back into the original plants collected in the wild. On the right is Cattleya cornelia. I remember seeing this for the first time, Labiata by Puma. It's a small stature plant, and those flowers are just absolutely precious. They're not huge, they're just the perfect size. And you'll notice in both of these photos, notice how the lip totally covers the column. Um, I know Bill Owens at Carter and Holmes used to hate having the reproductive organs exposed in his hybrids. And so you can see these are very chaste flowers. They're nice and covered up. They wear their covering well. Both beautiful flowers, both species and the hybrid. Next. This is my plant, not a particularly good flowering because I didn't see it even coming into bloom until it was actually opening. This goes back a long way too. I love these old things. We have something in common. This is Troubadour. The hybrid was made, registered in 1959. And Bonanza was a product of B.O. Bracey's breeding, and I think that was registered early in the 1950s. It's a combination of nigration, which has got nigrella in the background. Some of the clones were much darker than this one. This tends to be a medium lavender. But I've noticed over the years, it's got a lot to do with the temperature at which I'm growing it in. At one time, these were considered very dark flowers. There were an awful lot of crosses made with this, just because it was so different than what was available in lavenders at the time. But now that deep color is something we just accept as available everywhere. But it's beautiful given its age. Next. Here we have an interesting array of plants. Um, Edisto variety Carol is on the left. That's Mariozella myocone. Mariozella is a gorgeous thing that is hard to grow and extremely valuable if you want to make red, purple kinds of hybrids. Um, it's hard to grow because it's got a lot of Cattleya dowiana in it. But the parent of that is Oconee, which is supposed to be in the right, but that is not Oconee. Um, we know it because there are some clones that are so distinctive that we can pick out the characteristics of it. And you can look at the lip of this, you can look at the petals and sepals, even though the color is really nice. My guess is this is an Oconee hybrid, but that's all I can do is guess. We know it's not Oconee. Often people bring me plants in meetings and say, I've had this for years. It was my mother's. Can you tell me what it is? And it'll be in bloom. It's gorgeous, but without the tag, it's very difficult to tell exactly what that is, unless it happens to be a famous clone that has some distinctive characteristic. On the bottom, this is Norman's Bay Low. Um, Norman's Bay is an old hybrid going back into the late 30s and early 40s. Um, two two hybrids in the background, Heartland and Ishtar. They're actually both still around, even in unvirus form, and you get a sense of this was dark in terms of cattleyas at the time. They're large flowers. The low is considered the darkest, and it depends on how you take the photo and the light and everything. But if you had this standing up next to Edisto, you'd see the difference between a lavender and a red. And Edisto Carol is pretty darn close to red. I've had it in the past. It's a beautiful thing. It's a good parent. I think I've used it in a hybrid somewhere along the line. But here we have some beautiful, beautiful classic orchids. Next. This is a study in Cattleya bicolor. I love the way in which we're getting to look at aspects of the parentage that come out. So upper left is Edisto. We just saw that with Cattleya bicolor. And Cattleya bicolor produces this almost always, this semi-isthmus lip. The column is not typically covered all the way to the pollen, and it takes on the color often of the other parent, but this is a beautiful flower. Now look on the right. Here's another bicolor cross. This is with Sydney Southwick. Um, Interestingly, both of these hybrids use a tetraploid um, pod parent, and I'm pretty sure a diploid pollen parent. But the Harriet Brickle, that's named after one of our members' mother-in-law, I think it was. Look how flat it is, but you still see that lip. There's been quite a few of these awarded because they've come in lots of different colors. And on the bottom is Walden's Glen Wings of Fire. And this is Oconee, the true Oconee crossed with bicolor. And typically, when the Hawaiians make a bicolor cross, they use a dark brown one, and when the folks on the East Coast make a bicolor cross, they use a green one. And I've tried and tried to see if there was a real difference between the two based on that, but it looks like the offspring just take the characteristic color from the other parent in most cases. But all three of these are beautiful. Now look at the bottom. One more bicolor cross. This is with Chocolate Drop. Chocolate Drop is Guttata byrondiaca. So it's a bicolor, pretty big bicolor, tall bicolor. And you can see lots of flowers. And once this hybrid is grown to be a really large plant, it can have a pretty high flower count. And having said that, bicolor we don't think of as having a high flower count because we just don't see any really well-grown plants. But if you look at some of the awards, there's 7 and 8 flowers on an inflorescence for some of these. So it has the capacity to have a lot of flowers. But beautiful example of the influence of bicolor. You'll notice on all of these, the column and the pollen are naked. Bill Owens would not have liked these. Next. George King Southern Cross. I don't want to repeat this because if you've heard it, it may be getting boring. But this is the same plant as George King Serendipity. I say the same, but it's not. This is a Mericlone mutation. When George King was Mericloned, Gene Crocker took some flasks of the Mericlone to Australia, and this one bloomed out there. And they asked if they could name it differently, and they did. They named it Southern Cross. But notice the parents. It's a relatively medium yellow crossed with a big white, Cattleya bob Betts. And when you breed this with something else, you have to be careful because if that something else has a white in it, you'll get a percentage of white Cattleyas come out. It is a great parent. I've used it a couple of times, and it produces, just like you might expect, yellow offspring for the most part, sometimes with a little bit of color on the petals and sepals. But is every bit as good a parent as the Serendipity clone. Surprised we don't have that in one of our slides tonight. Next, Suzuki's Yellow Flare. This is an interesting hybrid. So on the bottom, we have the Waikiki Gold Leah. So you can get a sense of what one of the parents was. And then on the upper right is a really good example of a characteristic that isn't something that we're used to. The Suzuki's Yellow Flare has a number of species in the background that have a lot of yellow pigments. And so as the pigment ages, or as the flowers age, depending on the color or the temperature, you can get some variations in color. And so what you see here is flowers were opened a week apart. And that might be all there is, although could be that the flowers on the right might actually darken too. You notice there's more color on the lip than there is on the right. And that's an interesting characteristic. I've been observing this in some of my own hybrids, and it surprised me how distinct it can be from week to week as the same hybrids start to open. And I don't know that it's a difference in the clone other than the temperature. And here in Florida this time of year, we can have 90-degree days or 65-degree days. Next. Cattleya intermedia. On the left is variety Orlata. crown phlox. This is a beautiful clone. And if you look carefully, what you'll notice is you'll see that the lip, you can see where the column is partially enclosed by the lip. And look how colorful that is. That's the characteristic that makes it an orlata form. And typically the flowers themselves are a little blush, maybe a little stippling, but very nice, fairly large flowers. The one on the right, so you and I both have this, I believe. Intermediate variety Vinicolor Akinii. Now, the Akinii characteristic isn't just the flare that's on the petals, it's also the shape of the petals. Take a look at the petals. You can't quite see them as well as you would hope, but notice how wide they are because the petals are basically trying to be a lip. And look at the lip arrangement. Look at how that's shaped. Look how different that is from the intermedia orlata on the left side. It's an interesting characteristic because if you want to breed or produce a Cattleya hybrid using intermedia, if you use the Kinei, you get wider petals. If you use the standard form, you get narrow petals. And below is a perfect example of that. This is Pandora Bracey, Orchid Glade cone, and this is an intermedia Akinii hybrid. And look how wide the petals are. It's a perfect example, too, of the color of the lip being projected onto the petals. That is how you can always tell whether something is a splash from a Akinii or a flare. You can readily find flares on lots of Cattleyas, and what you can always do to tell if it's a flare is if the flare the mark is not the same as the lip in terms of the shape, then it's not an Akinii cross. And here it's a perfect example of that characteristic. Next. I think that very few people would recognize how rare this flower is. This is Beringiana, which is in bloom right now. Most greenhouses around here. This is the Alba form, Hamlin. And this is a photograph from Claude Hamilton, who I guess recently moved to Florida from Jamaica. He is the guy who made a lot of the crosses using Caribbean species like Brotonia, adding it to all kinds of things. You will find some advertised Beringiana albas. And what you'll notice on almost all of them, if you look in the lip, you'll see there's a little color there. And when you flower those, often if you grow them in high light, you'll see just a little bit of lavender shading hiding in the petals and sepals. This is the pure alba, and there are not many of them around. If you have one, cherish it because they're expensive to buy. Although I'm hoping that we're going to see some of these in clones in the very near future because it's a beautiful species and this white color form is remarkable. The petals on this are also really nice for the species. Next, some bifoliates, Cattleya Bactea, grape wax. Here we have Beringiana. We just saw one that was the alba form, crossed with Cattleya guttata. This is an old one. This has been around a long time. Trying to remember where I got the first one. It was from Hauserman's in Chicago. They had clones. It grows really well. You won't see the true production of this clone till you get a large plant. I just remember mine flowering in a really small plant with just one or two flowers and being disappointed because the pictures always showed like this. But once you grow that up a little bit, you'll see lots and lots of flowers. And that's being grown very well. Steve Dorsey's plant. Upper right, Portia Beringiana by Labiata, a very, very, very classic hybrid. Been around a long time. It's been remade over and over again. There are cerulean forms of the hybrid, but you're only seeing two flowers here. I mentioned earlier, till you get a really large plant, you don't see the true number of flowers that you can get on this cross. And the Labiata adds some size to it too, which is sometimes too much. They're too crowded, but a well-grown plant, again, and the flowers will tend to have a little better spacing. Bottom right is Portia by Gouldiana. Laelia gouldiana is a species. I think it's now a cattleya, or is that still a laelia,
I
Sue?
think that's a Laelia.
Yeah, it used to be a laelia and still is. Most of the laelias get substituted, but you can see the Portia still there in that color of that lip with this laelia added. And I'm guessing, looking at the plant's much smaller thanks to the laelia. A really interesting hybrid. Next, Volcano Queen. This is a really interesting hybrid because first, I'm interested in ceruleas, and I've had this plant for a long time, and everyone keeps asking me why I haven't made a hybrid with it, and it's because I can't figure out where the cerulea came from. It's got species in the background that shouldn't be compatible to make blues. They should come out to be lavender, but it also has in the background um, some really powerful species like purpurata that has this really deep, deep lip color. It's got multiple doses of Beringiana in the background, which is why it was blooming this time of the year, and a Gaskeliana grandparent, which gives it the size. Of all the different aspects in the ancestry of this would be one I would never expect one to come out cerulean or two to be as large and nice as this. But it is one of the nicest ceruleas in my collection, and you can see why that. That purpurata intensity from the lip is just coming out in that. And like I said, it's a very, very good grower.
Hmm.
Bottom left, Ringyo Fan Boy, Boy's Grotto by Landate. Um, that's a very interesting hybrid with a lot of different species in the background. The Landate is a heavily spotted Cattleya, relatively small growing, crossed with a Cerulea that's got a lot of things in the background too. And the Landate seems to be dominating for the flower shape, and you can see a lot of spotting in the dorsal, and I'm guessing in the petals there's probably some too. Bottom right, Granoise Felicity, Blue Honey Bun. The the hybrids that Granois had awarded have always been interesting to me because the colors that he had in his flowers um, astounded me because I'd seen some of these same clones years before and swore they didn't have that amount of color. I learned later on, after um, getting to know his ex-wife, that Granois had interesting additions to his water for his ceruleas. Now, just to let you know, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, a lot of Phalaenopsis growers um, use Epsom salts and always have to get more intense colors, particularly in the cerulean colors, but even in the standard colors of Phalaenopsis, they would get good intense color. But Granois had something else that he added that really was distinct, and these are orchids that when you flower them and they start to open, you may be disappointed in the color, but almost always they will darken. And if you can ever figure out what his formula was, you may be able to get them to be really dark too. If you were to compare this flower to the ones in the awards photos, you'd see how much darker they are. So if you bought a Cerulean and it's not flowering as dark as you think it should be, give it a little time, and then you might try the Epsom salts to juice that color a little bit. Next. Well, we haven't done with the spots, have we? Wild West Doc Holiday. This is a Chinese bronze by Penny Kuroda cross. You can see the spots. What I'm most impressed with is how wide the petals are in this particular clone. Look how wide the lip is in that contrast of the dorsal covering on the lip. Look at that. That's just something. I'm trying to count the flowers. One, two, three. Looks like there's at least 4 or 5 there. A good flower count. Penny Penicillium is an interesting thing too, because there are two different forms of Penny Penicillium with experts in the field arguing about which one's correct. Um, on the right is Caudebec Linwood. This has Penny Penicillium too. but doesn't have the flares. Many of the penny crudo hybrids have these indistinct flares. But quarterback Linwood is interesting because it's a product of a mutation that occurred during the cloning process. And I mentioned that for the Southern Cross clone of George King. That same thing happened here. In this case, the flower looks very much the same. It's just more robust and wider, with the addition of double the number of chromosomes in this guy. Below is a quarterback that you see that's more the standard form. This is what they should look like as a diploid. Um, and often the tetraploids have bigger, wider, etc. But often, though, the two ends, the non-tetraploids, grow better and faster too. So I've had the quarterback four end, and it does grow a little more slowly than the two ends, but it still grows pretty well. Bottom left, Cattleya Lulu, hot pink. You love this, Sue. It's
I
a
love
really
it.
beautiful thing.
Mhm.
Seems like it's always in bloom in your greenhouse. But
I
this has
wish.
got this is a penny crudo cross too. All four of these in this one slide have penny crudo as a parent. Very nice. Next, Cattleya Laura Newton, Leulata glossa by Cattleya interglossa. And this should say Laura Newton cerulean because this is the cerulean color form obtained by, produced by breeding two different ceruleas together that have the same genetic mistake. And in this case, because we're dealing with a cross that involves um, several species, Leopoldii and Amethysta glossa. They're going to be open flowers with the lip as the main color feature. And then the background is sort of an ivory with these little cerulean spots. I found it fascinating with this kind of hybrids because typically the cerulean color on the lip is really distinctive, but often there will be a different background color instead of being this little more of a ivory with a little indigo suffused. There'll be some that have almost a lemon background, which is interesting too. But the lip is always the same, indigo. And you got a lot of flower count in that, so that's nice. Next. Cattleya Terry Bottom, number 3. Um, I was thinking this is one of the Terry Bottoms that you usually have a lot of flowers on, Sue. Am I remembering incorrectly?
I think this is the first time I've bloomed this particular one.
That explains it.
Yeah.
That's that's one of the ones that I gave you
Yes.
the back bulbs on. Yeah, it
Yeah.
takes them a while to get going again once you cut that off. So I know some of yours have a lot of high flower count. This is number 3.
Number 3 for me.
Yeah. Oh, so it didn't come from me saying
Oh,
number 3?
no, it didn't come from you saying number 3.
Okay, okay. I've got a number 3 too, and it didn't quite look like this, but
Yeah.
sometimes there's variation. Okay. Below, San Diego Spice. That's an interesting flower. Look at all of the spots on it. Look at that lip. It is hard to ignore the bifoliates. A lot of folks who get started in Callias don't really give bifoliates a second thought. The flowers are smaller, the lips aren't as robust, perhaps. But once you learn to appreciate them and really understand how many flowers they can get and how to grow them, the contrast on these can be really nice. This has got like a light yellowish background with lots of spots on it. This is Pam Peters. I'm not sure where she lives, but this is San Diego spice. So perhaps she lives in San Diego. I've
Yeah.
never seen this one before, but it's really pretty.
She's a San Diego girl.
That sounds right. Next. Okay, here we have some of my favorite species, Prostica Meriae by Cattleya purpurata. And this is called pink Meriae. The Meriae is an interesting species. It used to be in the Encyclia group, Epidendrum group. It didn't really fit, and everyone knew it. There were two different species that look alike or similar that we always knew were separate, but I've been fascinated by what it does as a parent. It is one of the few species in the Cattleya Alliance that its natural color form is green. And a lot of the early breeding was trying to get that green out. Unfortunately, the flowers tend to be small, and you can see the general characteristic of the flower for Marrier here. Cattleya purpurata is a much more standard Cattleya, and you don't see much of that in here. But I can see the Marrier. It does tend to have that dominant characteristic in the first generation. But in the second and third generation, when matched with just the right thing, it can produce green flowers. And so value of that in the background is for green flowers. But that's real interesting. I've never seen that cross before, and surprised that the Cattleya purpurata is so dominated. It is not something easily dominated. On the right, key lime stars. And here again, we've got a mixture of a number of genera. We have the Brassivola in here, and key lime stars also has Marrier in the background, and that's why you have that unusual generic abbreviation, the PCV. I guess that's the more modern one. And the old one was VNRA. And don't even try to figure out what it is. Um, It'll just be changed again soon, I'm sure. But take a look at the petal on the right of this one flower, sort of in the background, and notice that color break that's spreading over the part of the petal. It's not that unusual when you start getting these mixed genera together. It's just because even though they have 20 pairs of chromosomes, they often have different genetic information on the same number chromosome, which can lead to some interesting things. I've been studying this for years and trying to figure out whether you could predict it, and if so, I can't do it, but it probably can be. I just haven't figured it out. Okay, next. This used to be Catatonia. Why not? Variety Yellow Kitty. Arundhacea by Brotonia sanguiana. And if you've got this particular hybrid and you're saying right now, mine's not yellow, well, none of them were for quite a bit of a while. But if you look at the background of the hybrid, Arundhacea's got yellow or orange, and sanguiana, there are some yellow forms of it. And I asked around when I first started seeing the yellows whether the yellow came from inbreeding by selfing or sieving, or whether it came from remaking the cross using a yellow Arundhacea and a yellow Sanguiana. And I got both answers. So it's one or the other, and maybe both. That's all I can tell you. I have to say, I was so surprised the first time I was in Hawaii and went to a hardware store where I was advised to look at the orchids there and saw this particular form of why not, because I hadn't seen it anywhere before. And it wasn't but a year or two later where we started seeing miraclones. On the right, Lincoln Adrian Bryan. Here's why not cross with Brassicatlia yellowbird. Again, the Sanguiana in the background has this characteristic beautiful open lip, which allows the spots or whatever's in the lip to be seen better. And this one is really nice, the way the color is on the petals, contrasting with the yellow in the background. Really, really a nice flower. That's something else I don't think I remember seeing before. And the Sanguiana typically also reduces the plant size. So get a smaller plant, you can have a lot of flowers, and the real trick is getting that inflorescence length down so that the flowers don't fall over on a flimsy inflorescence. And both of these look like they've got that accomplished. Next, Epidendrum robustum. That is a spectacular green flower. I do not know this species. I'm fairly certain, just looking up, that that is the standard color for this particular species. This is an epidendrum. All of the ones I have seen that had this green color have all been cooler growing epidendrums. I don't know if this is the case or not. Didn't get a chance to talk to Keith about that, but I could see that being something that would be very useful in breeding. Epidendrums will hybridize with cattleyas. but often the offspring will not reproduce very well. And it's probably, again, what I was saying earlier, 20 pairs of chromosomes, but the same information isn't on the same chromosomes from species to species. But that's beautiful. That'd be one that I would urge Keith to get a selfing of or a sib cross, see if we can make more of those, because I think that would be in high demand. This used to be Epilalia cattleya Don Herman Gold Rush. And so this has got Guernsey, it's got Cattleya in the background, and it's got Epidendrum stamfordianum. Epidendrum, I mentioned, don't always produce viable hybrids with Cattleyas, or at least they don't produce hybrids that themselves reproduce. But stamfordianum is an unusual one. It has upright growth, but then the inflorescence goes down. Decumbent, I guess, is the term. And more importantly, almost any Cattleya you attach to it, breed with it, it'll still make a beautiful hybrid. And in this case, you get the color from the gold digger, and that's generally what I've seen is the Stamfordianum adds that shape, but the color comes from the other parent. And this is a good example. Don Herman um, uh, was a really nice guy. I interviewed him for my Cattleya book. Was one of the most knowledgeable people I interviewed, probably because he was younger than most of the others, and had not been involved in the business of it per se, but knew all the people who were and paid close attention to what they were doing. Um, so this is one of the crosses named after him. I don't know if it was his, but it's certainly a beautiful thing and still available as a clone. Well worth having. Next, Brassavola nodosa. I hope everyone listening to this has at least one clone of this. It's just stunning. And each year I stick this out under my dead orange tree and it looks like hell for about a month. And then all of a sudden it really starts to grow. It loves highlight. And this is an interesting plant for a number of reasons. Over the years, I've observed the nodosa. Quite a few of them used to come to the judging table. And one of the things that's interesting about it, and if you've got a nodosa, take a rule and measure how wide the flower is without flattening it, just how wide the natural spread is. Most Brassavola nodosas, the flowers, the petals hang forward. And so if you get the natural spread, you don't really see how large the flower is. This is a combination of nodosa, um, I'm trying to think of it's a Carter and Holmes cross, Newberry, I think. Anyway, it was an award plant that Carter and Holmes had, and it had the flattest flowers I've ever seen in a nodosa, and they crossed it with a nodosa that's been around a long time. It's named after, I guess, Susan Fuchs, and those flowers were huge, but they cupped forward, and they crossed these two together, and because I've always been interested in this characteristic, I bought about a half dozen and flowered them out. And most of them had different amounts of each. This one particular has the same size petals as the Susan Fuchs, as if they were flat, and it has the flat petals and sepals from the Carter and Holmes nodosa. And that's why I selected it and still grow it. And this year it just went nuts. It also can get 5 or 6 flowers on a stem, which is a characteristic. You can't really see all the flowers on this because they go all the way around the plant. It's just a fun plant to grow. And if you want to smell it, you got to go outside at night. So if you have it in a lanai where there aren't any mosquitoes, you can do this without much pain. But if you have it in outside where it's not protected, you may be feeding the mosquitoes. Okay, personal experience. Bottom right is Lynette's snowstorm. Here's a nodosa cross that is extraordinarily good. And we've talked about this over and over again because typically when you cross a nodosa to a hybrid, you get fairly narrow petals. And certainly these are narrower than Stephen Oliver Foraker. Stephen Oliver Foraker has been around a long time. It was one of the first tetraploid semialbas out there. And the unfortunate part about it, it wasn't big and round, but it was still good compared to anything we had. And this particular clone got very good petals and sepals from the Stephen Oliver Forker, much wider than you would expect. And I don't remember seeing this cross. I think this must have been Lynette's snowstorm. This must have been one of Lynette's crosses, and I don't remember ever seeing any others. But this one is really good, and the judges thought so too. They gave it an HCC. And that's Keith Davis's plant. I've seen this for years, and it's always a stunning thing when it's in bloom. Next. We always have so many great no-dosa hybrids among our growers. Bottom left is Bonosa Wabash Valley. And this was Rose's favorite clone because we had at one time access to a lot of clones around. And the thing I've always loved about it is the flower count. And you get a good sense there how many flowers. Nodosa, as I mentioned earlier, 4 or 5 flowers is normal. And bicolor can get 5 or 6, 7 maybe, but you rarely see that come out in the Binosa, even though it should. And again, I think here's the case where you just got to get a big plant, and then you get lots and lots of flowers. Now, right below it is another Binosa. Look how different they are. And that was the characteristic that was interesting about the cross. I think the cross below was made with a tetraploid bicolor.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember where I saw that. It might have been Fred Clark, but someone had a tetraploid bicolor cross with a nodosa. And look at the size of the petals on it. So the bicolor is giving twice the number of genes to the cross as the cross above, which is a diploid. But both nice and green. And look how different the lips are. The lip kind of says that that bicolor was a tetraploid.
Mhm.
Upper right, rustic spots, variety heat wave. I
Hmm.
suddenly am seeing this thing everywhere. That's a Richard Muir cross by Landate, which is a, a spot, smaller, I guess, smaller growing plant. Um, Wonderful color. And again, the lip recommends it, if nothing else, not just because of the color, but all the nice spots, petals and sepals, nicely spotted. Just everything you would want. I think that's been cloned, and that's why I'm seeing so much of it. Bottom right, Hamlin's Magic, Leilani, Jalapa by Nodosa. And if you've got Jalapa, it's a really brilliant red or red-orange thing. And a little that comes through, but as we've said over and over in this series, Nodosa is really dominant for suppressing color. And when you do get a colorful clone, you take good care of it. And I think that this is probably more colorful than you realize just because of the background in the photo. But that's a nice, nice flower. Hence, it's got a name. Next. Oh, goodness, it's over.
I got
Um,
mine.
Now, this is an interesting thing. I think all of the plants that we've talked about today that Keith Davis sent in, he put together into, I guess he put them out in his yard and took a photograph of it just to get a sense. You get a sense of the size of these, and notice the Mexipedium. Look how small the flowers are in that compared to some of these other clones here, and look how large the bifoliate is. It's nice to see the contrast and the size of the plants and the size of the flower all in one place. So thank you, Keith, for that. And with that, we can say who's coming next month. It's the famous Fred Clark from Sunset Valley Orchids, and he can talk all about his Fred Clark auras. But he's not going to talk about that. He's talking about growing, right, Sue?
Yep. How to become the best grower you could possibly be.
And he is a good grower. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
Yep. All right, Courtney. Well, you were wonderful as you always are.
It was fun. It was a doable number of photos this month too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, send your photos in. Next month isn't that far away.
No, and we've got an early deadline this month because Janice is going off to Egypt. So we've got to get everything in a couple of days earlier than normal.
And when should they have their photos in?
I think we said the 16th
The,
or the
no,
21st.
21st.
Okay, so basically you got about another week.
Yeah. All right, very good. Thank you, Courtney. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank-
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Courtney.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yes.